Okay, well, I'm glad we got the vote over so that we don't have to worry
One of
about
them.
One of them, yeah. We have quite a few others today. Offering a GST holiday requires a few votes, apparently. It's great to have both of you with us. You both have played really key roles in our government when it comes to this conversation around how we can decarbonize, but how we can mobilize capital to do that. And we know Canada is at the forefront of the race to attract investment and seize opportunities in the clean economy. I think our government has demonstrated time and time, and through your leadership, I have to say I admire both of you for the work that you do. We know that there's lots of private sector capital and investment that's going to be required within and outside of Canada. Minister Wilkinson, what are some of the things that the government is doing to stay competitive globally, and how we're helping incentivize that private capital?
So, I mean, first of all, I just want to say, can folks see? Can you ring? Okay. Just congratulations to you, Brian, on this amazing event. I remember the first year it was it was a fraction of
a little smaller
this size. So it's such an important set of conversations that it's great to see all of this. I often say that, at least in my mind, the opportunities associated with the transition the world is going through towards what scientifically must be a lower carbon future represents an economic opportunity on the scale of the Industrial Revolution. And it is one that is being pursued actively by a range of countries around the world. I would say perhaps most aggressively by China. And so it is important to think about it in the context of a competitive environment. And I would say there are a number of elements that we have been working on and putting into place to ensure that Canada is at the forefront of this transition, particularly as it relates to areas where we have a comparative advantage in the world. And those would include having a competitive tax environment, of course, as a foundation. But it's about putting in place financial tools that actually are about catalyzing early action. And so the investment tax credits that we have put into place are a fundamental part of that. The Strategic Innovation Fund, which made investments in a number of early projects, is a really important part of that. In the mining space, we have a Critical Minerals Infrastructure Fund to help to actually build the infrastructure that's needed to accelerate project development. And then there are tools like the Canada Infrastructure Bank, which actually offers low-cost debt to particular kinds of projects to try to ensure that you're improving the overall business case such that you actually, again, catalyze action. And the Canada Growth Fund, which is an investment vehicle that is intended to take on a little bit more risk and to catalyze private sector investment internally and externally into Canadian-based projects. So those are important. And then I would say the last piece is the regulatory and permitting environment. You've got to be competitive from that perspective. It can't take you twice as long in this country than it does in Australia to permit a mine. And so we need to actually ensure that we are moving quickly, not cutting corners from an environmental perspective, certainly not cutting corners from engagement with Indigenous peoples. But we have to be able to find ways to do things faster. We've spent a lot of time on that. Canada is not as bad as we actually often tell ourselves we are. I will tell you the Americans and the Australians look to us as actually being the model, but we have to be able to do it faster, and we've spent an enormous amount of time looking at how we actually do things more quickly, and we have created an office in the Prime Minister's office that is actually focused on clean growth projects and accelerating that work.
That's great to see, and we have accelerated. There's so many that I've been a part of in terms of announcements, and I'm sure you too get to be a part of so many more. It's hard to actually know all of the things that our government is doing because we're doing so much. And earlier this year, we had a really great announcement. Obviously, it's something that we all talked about for quite some time in the lobbies of Parliament, and that was the announcement on the Canada's Sustainable Finance Taxonomy and specifically the guiding principles around that. Obviously, we'll get more details on that very soon. Minister Guilbeault, can you explain why this is such an important positive development for Canada's financial markets and institutions, and who, they're looking certainly for new projects and to help. Why is this so positive in terms of having that taxonomy finally moving forward from your perspective?
Well, first, Ryan, I would like to echo what Jonathan said and thank you for all the work that you've done on this and bringing us all here. As Jonathan was saying, I think there were 50 people the first year of this. So it's quite amazing. Also want to give a big shout out to Kathy Bardswit, Barb's Van, and all of the members of SFAC who really helped us get to the announcement that was made a few months ago in terms of Canada being able to move on taxonomy. I think some of us would have wished that things have gone maybe perhaps a little bit faster, but we're there. And you know, coming back from Baku and COP29, if I can make a parallel. We don't dispute at a global level that we need to provide the global south with something around $1.3 trillion to help them decarbonize, adapt to the impacts of climate change. But there's not enough public dollars out there to do that. So the agreement in Baku was to triple the previous financial goal from donor countries from $100 billion a year to $300 billion a year. And what is true internationally is true domestically as well. There's not enough public dollars to do the transition in Canada and to do everything we need to do. So how do we put in place the necessary guardrails, the transparency mechanisms to attract private sector capital to do what is needed? And that's exactly what the taxonomy is. It's not to tell people you can't do this or you can't do that, but it's to tell them, well, you know, these type of investments are transition aligned, are aligned with our 2050 targets. And these are not. As an investor, you can choose to do what you want, but at least you have the information. And I think that this necessary, and that's one thing I'm sure we've all heard from investors, we need to have the information. We want to know if that investment will be considered, you know, green or transition aligned or not. And that is why it's so important for us to be able to provide that information to the investment community.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, we want to mobilize a lot more capital. I think we've talked about the investment gap. Canadian Climate Institute said it was about $120 billion per year. I
don't think we'll get that from Christian.
Well, we certainly won't, and that's the point, right, is to say that, well, the private market has got to help get to where we have to engage those market participants if we're ever going to achieve net zero by 2050. So we just can't get there by working alone. And I think that key realization for me came quite a long time ago, and that's one of the things that fuels my passion for this work. And I know you two feel the same because we've had many conversations about this. But Minister Wilkinson, I know in your portfolio of work, you know, you've got, you know, industrial sort of areas. In particular, I'm interested, like I would like to see us scale renewables at the pace that we see some of the other countries around the world scaling them at, and really, I mean, we have a lot of clean energy in Canada already, I think, in terms of, you know, our sort of energy mix in general, but I'd like to see us scale, like, are there opportunities as you see it to mobilize more private capital to get further faster in particularly in renewables, and what can you tell us about, you know, your views on that?
Well, yeah, I think there is, and Canada came later to the renewables game than certainly countries like Germany, you know, which started wind, and of course the whole dynamic of the renewables market has changed a lot. I mean, it was Germany that actually catalyzed all of this because they were willing to pay more for wind to actually help it come down, you know, the manufacturing cost curve, the technology curve. We now have a situation where renewables are actually pretty competitive with other forms of energy generation. And so in that context, it's about accelerating action rather than actually needing to fully, you know, buttress the business case. So we have a number of programs, probably the most important is what we call the Smart Renewables Program, where we actually make investments to actually catalyze action. And through that program, just in the last few years, we've catalyzed 2,700 megawatts of renewables, 2,700 megawatts of storage, and we need to do, you know, continue to do more. I think it's accelerating in a number of provinces. We have an interesting utility market or electricity market in this country, of course, 13 different electricity markets, but many of them have been public utility run for a long time. And that has created some challenges in terms of being able to actually add renewables at the pace The market that actually was the strongest in Canada for a long time was Alberta, which is a deregulated market. They actually allowed private entrance into that market, and it went like gangbusters. We helped to catalyze some of that. I see now utilities, including in my home province of British Columbia, which are actually opening up to independent power producers to be able to actually do much more in the way of renewables. So my view is it is going to go faster. I would say the other thing that we are doing and that we need to continue to do to actually catalyze action is through tools like the Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program, where Indigenous peoples become partners in these projects, and in some cases are 100% owners in the projects. That's going to be done both through the loan program. We've also through the Smart Renewables program. A vast majority of the projects that we've actually done in that program have significant Indigenous equity participation, and that's important in the context of actually finding ways to accelerate action.
Yeah, that's great, and that's something we talked about in the previous panel, is just how we can drill down with industry and capital providers as a government to, especially with the taxonomy as a framework to start to decarbonize by sector, and I'm hoping we get to have more conversations about that today. Minister Guilbeault, just quickly to you about societal costs. Can you remind us really of what inaction really means for the energy transition? Like, there's such a huge societal cost. Can we really afford to wait for markets to solve this problem on their own? Like, I mean, I think if left to their own devices, they're likely not going to do that. So how do we really accelerate change, and what's that societal cost that's really kind of hanging over our heads?
Well, I see really two important costs to our society of not acting. One is obviously the cost of inaction faced by climate change. We've seen from the Insurance Bureau of Canada the data for just the months of July and August this year, $7 billion. So these 2 months make 2024 the costliest year ever for natural catastrophes in Canada, and it's not the entire year of 2024. So, and you know, the trend is very clear in terms of that. So there's obviously this cost, but the other thing is what Jonathan is talking about. I mean, climate change, which largely started as an environmental and human rights issue, has become more and more about the economy of the 21st century and the job of the 21st century, and who's going to be able to have their share of that pie, and we'll see what happens in the United States. But regardless of what happens in the United States, last year at COP28 in Dubai, countries agreed that we needed to triple renewables from where we were last year by 2030. I was with Fatih Birol from the IEA in Baku, and he was saying that already with the investment decisions that have been made and announced, we're at 2.7 times, and we're in 2024. Right. So it's going to go. This is where the world is heading, and the only question is, do we want to be part of it or not? Do we want to have the jobs of the 21st century, the companies of the 21st century?
I can answer that. Yes, we do. Yes, we do, right? Okay, last question to both ministers. Quick reaction here. What is the next challenge in terms of your portfolio that can be informative for the conversations in this conference? And then what enables you to really remain hopeful about the future, given your current responsibilities?
Well, I mean, basically, I'm the stick, he's the carrot. It may be why he's so much more popular than I am. But so I think, and Jonathan rightly touched on it earlier, like we need to provide a good, robust regulatory framework on all things climate, energy transition. We need to have the right set of incentives. We need to make sure that in terms of permitting and project approval, we are efficient. But as Jonathan said, that we don't cut corners, but we do things in an efficient manner, and I think we can do that. And there's a number of examples to point to that. In the last year, I've approved 2 lithium mines in Cree territory, one on the Quebec side, one with the Quebec Cree, and one in northern Ontario. And when you involve those communities from the get-go, it's much easier. It doesn't mean that they'll always say yes, but usually what will create delays in project approval is because you haven't done your consultation, you haven't implicated Indigenous communities early on, and you haven't done your homework on the environmental side of things, whether it's species at risk, migratory birds, the Fisheries Act. If you do these things right as a company, chances are things will go much more smoothly. So I think, you know, I will continue being the stick, and Jonathan can talk about the carrots.
Go ahead, Carrot, your
Or
turn.
whatever.
Yeah, carrot. Not sure anybody's ever told me I'm a vegetable, but okay. So in terms of the biggest challenge, I think it's being able to move at the speed that we need to. And that is, of course, at the speed that science tells us we must in terms of climate change, but it's also at the speed that competition demands. Like, if you look just at China, they are now the #1 manufacturer of renewable energy technology, the #1 deployer. They are the #1 manufacturer of electric vehicles and the #1 deployer. They are they own most of the critical minerals value chains around the world. That doesn't happen by chance. So we need to be moving fast. And what gives me hope? What gives me hope is the beginning of this, it was all policy driven. And so the Germans decided they were going to pay 40 cents a kilowatt hour for wind, and they helped to actually come down here. That's largely no longer the case. We have most of the technologies we actually need to be able to make the change that we need to make. Electric vehicles are a better solution than an internal combustion engine. And for the first time this year, they're actually cheaper to make in China than it is to make an internal combustion engine. On a life cycle basis, they're like half the cost. Heat pumps are a better solution than a gas or an oil furnace. And they also give you cooling. And there are a range of technologies they're just better. So we're now in the place where the market can actually drive this far more than it could in the past. Doesn't mean there's not a role for government, but I am optimistic that even with bumps in the road from changes in different political configurations, that we are going to continue to see progress around the world on a path, on a challenge that is a challenge of our generation, a challenge to ensure a sustainable future for our kids, and that's sustainable environmentally, but it's also sustainable economically.
Yeah, what a perfect place to end and a perfect message, and that gives me hope. I want to thank both of you for being such great supports for this work, but also for our entire country, serving as ministers within our government. You've done incredible work. I know both of you have exchanged portfolios once or twice, but you guys are really doing great work. So I want to just thank you for being here. Thanks for being a great friend and support to me. Jonathan and Steven, thanks again, and wish you a great day. I know you've got lots of other things on your plate. And thanks for being here, even though we had lots of other competing things. It really means a lot to all of the people in this room, I know. So thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.